Well, okay. So tell you what. Let's we'll say the blessing. I'll start doing some of the summaries, and we'll see. And if David can join us, fine. Um, but but we'll go on back and we'll try to do it. We'll do it in an abbreviated manner. Um, so the bracha, the blessing is Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. We're we're gracious. We're grateful to God who sanctifies us and invites us to busy ourselves with Torah. So we respond. We're actually going back to the last several chapters of Deuteronomy at the end. They're very very brief chapters. Um, um, Vayelech, which is the 31st chapter of Deuteronomy, usually read in conjunction with Nitzavim. They almost always uh, appear together. Oh, there's another message from David saying, "Can you send me the link?" Okay, let me find that. Just a minute. Uh, why don't I have? There it is. No one ever accused me of being able to type quickly. Let's see if that brings him. Okay, so Vayelech, which is most often combined with Nitzavim in the 31st chapter of Deuteronomy. Moses announces to the people that he is getting too old. He's now 120 years old. He getting too old for him to continue leading the people. Um, After he's been pleading with God to let him cross over, God says no. But Moses tells the people they'll be okay. They'll even be successful. Joshua, the son of Nun, will be their new leader, and God will not forsake them. He gives them the famous words of strength, chazak ve'amatz, be strong, be of good courage, be strong, be resolute. Um, and then the phrase is that the Torah, and exactly what is meant at that point, there's certainly disagreement through history, not only the rabbinic history, but also there's David coming, but also the scholarly tradition of what exactly did Moses transmit. Shalom, David.
Shalom. Hello.
Okay.
Rabbi, I
Everything
just
everything okay?
joined and I didn't there's no link. Everything is fair and I'm
All
doing
right,
okay. I
good.
have ears right now. My two atheist friends are visiting from Canada.
Uh-huh, right.
And I just told them that I'll be with you for at least an hour.
Okay.
And I'm
All right.
so glad to be.
And I don't think that you've met Paul and Sherry, who are driving down
No,
from
I haven't.
Flagstaff. They're new members of the temple. They're part-time Flagstaff, part-time Green Valley.
Well, thank you. It's great to meet you, Paul and Sherry. Of course, I have quite a tradition with Flagstaff, knowing that I have been close friends of Gene and Carolyn Shoemaker for many years, and of course Clyde Tombaugh. So it's a magic city you're coming from, but welcome to our southern Arizona.
Thank you. It's
Thank you.
wonderful to meet you too.
Okay. David,
Thank
I don't
you.
know, we just got started because we were waiting to see if anybody else was going to join. Let me just finish with Vayelech, and then if you have a particular, did you have a poem or anything that you wanted to share?
I have a poem,
blessing
and
already.
I'm ready with Bereshit.
Oh, you're just okay. Well, we'll just go quickly and get to
Well,
Bereshit.
take your time.
Okay,
I'm
so
just here. I'm here.
so
now.
Moses transmit the Torah, although again we're not sure exactly what is meant by that, to the priests, with the command to the people that they should gather every 7 years. There's that seven magic number, that they should gather on Sukkot, on the fall harvest festival, to listen to the Torah being read and to study it. Later Jewish history turns that into the Simchat Torah celebration of ending the Torah scroll and beginning again. God gives Moses a poem to call the people to witness, Hakela Ta'am, gather all the people together. That and some of that particular paragraph or in poetry form comes into the liturgy. But when they think that and he's telling them that um, uh, uh, that even though the people will, so God is telling Moses and Joshua and all the people that even though God knows that the people will sin, and but just when they think that God has forsaken them and will not forgive them, then they should read that poem and be reassured that God will continue to be with them. Um, the Torah is given then to the Levites and placed in the ark along with the tablets, the two sets of tablets. There's the tablets from Mount Sinai that are complete, and then and all the remains of the tablets that were shattered. Moses calls all the people to hear the poem. It's kind of an interesting, homiletical um, particular situation of Moses giving. It's not quite the ethical will, but certainly these are his words as he anticipates not retirement, but as he anticipates death and the encouragement that he gives to the people. Ha'azinu, the next portion is really only a continuation of this poem, that it's one of the oldest prayer poems in all of the sacred literature. Moses tells it to the people just before ascending Mount Nebo, in the hills of Moab. God's deeds are perfect and just. God is always true and upright. Remember your history. Remember the breach. Remember the covenant. God that could have forsaken them or even destroyed them, but totally did not, because Israel is God's cherished inheritance. The God who deals death and gives life. Ultimately, God will bring vengeance upon Israel's enemies. Take to heart all of this Torah. That doesn't mean memorize it, but take it to heart and make it guidelines for your life. Teach it to your children. A familiar phrase also that comes throughout many of the prayer books, many of the references in Jewish literature, Kihu chayecha ve'orech yamecha, for this is your life, and this marks the length of your days to learn all these lessons that Moses gives to the people. Moses is then told to climb to the top of Mount Nebo to see the land from the east, looking towards the west, see the land on the opposite side of the Jordan River, but he will not enter. That's punishment for the incident at the waters of Meribat Kadesh, and where Moses did strike the rock twice, and all that. The Vizot HaBracha is the last portion. Again, very short. Moses' final blessing to the people, and his final farewell as he turns his back on them. He blesses each of the 12 tribes, giving them the phrase that again that we continue to use whenever we take the Torah out of the ark, Morasha Kihilat Yaakov, that this is the inheritance of the congregation of Jacob. Um, he continues then to climb up Mount Nebo in the hills of Moab across from Jericho by the Dead Sea, although no one knows. The tradition is that, and the text also says, no one knows exactly where his burial place is. He dies at age 120. The phrase in the Torah is that he dies there al pi Adonai, according to God's word, or in some of the midrash, it's he dies there with a kiss from God's lips or from God's mouth. And no one knows his grave until this day. And of course, the phrase that never again did there arise in Israel another prophet like Moses who knew God face to face and was witness, if not even agent, of all of the wonders and the miracles that God performed in Egypt and throughout the wanderings. The children of Israel mourn for Moses for 30 days, and then Joshua assumes the leadership. There are other quotes that if we had more time, that I would be sharing. But the tradition, when we end any of the books of the Torah, and certainly when we end the complete cycle, Chazak, Chazak, Benit Chazek, let us be strong, and we strengthen each other. Having
Amen.
said that, we now go back to Genesis, back to the beginning, and I am going to then defer to my friend and teacher, Dr. David. Tell us what your insights give us about Bereshit.
Okay,
Please.
but thank you, Rabbi. Before I do that, I just forgot, and I'm sorry about this. I'm glad you reminded me, and I'm here. Hello, Amy.
Hello.
And, hi. And just a note to Paul and Sherry that last May, up at Lowell Observatory, there was a gathering in the Pines to remember Carolyn Shoemaker. And the family gave very interesting little obituaries until his son, Patrick, started to talk about life with father. And he said, any father is going to have problems with his son, and I was no exception. And then he started to tell some stories. And as he was talking, he just broke into tears as if Carolyn had died just yesterday and Agina died just yesterday. One night I was sort of just reading when I got a text message from Patrick Shoemaker saying that just as they were about to close up the house for good to sell it, he discovered the original Discovery films of Comet Shoemaker Levy 9. He immediately sent them to me. They are now at the next desk. And this is priceless. They are two of the most important photographs ever taken in astronomy. And I'm looking for a place to give them to, but for now, they're right with me. I'm next going to go on to my poem, which is from Sarah Williams, called The Old Astronomer to His Pupil. I will just read the first and the last verses. And when he talks about an honorary degree that he was going to get from a German college. Reach me down my Tycho Brahe, I would know him when we meet. When I share my later science, sitting humbly at his feet, he may know the law of all things, yet be ignorant of how we are working to completion, working on from then to now. You may tell the German college that their honor comes too late, but they must not waste repentance on the grisly savant's fate. Though my soul may set in darkness, it will rise in perfect light. I have loved the stars too fondly to be fearful of the night.
Oh,
Mhm. Right.
Thank you.
that was beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And now I'm going to talk to you a little bit about Bereshit. To me, Bereshit is the most precious portion of the entire Torah because it discusses the creation of the heavens. God creates the heavens, the world, Adam and Eve. And there's so many things. I could probably talk for hours, but I don't have hours. So I'm going to do what the rabbi tried to do and summarize. I think it is unbelievable how the creation of the world can be merged with our scientific understanding with the creation of the world. In the beginning, God creates the heavens and the earth. And the first thing he says is, let there be light. And people are saying, well, look, he says, let there be light. But on the fourth day, he made the stars also. Didn't he do them when he said, let there be light? No, he did not. When he says, let there be light, I believe that he is referring to the original light and glow of the Big Bang when the universe is created. And it's, I believe that's what the writer in Bereshit is thinking about. But he has the heavens and he's creating the world. He separates the waters from the firmament. He creates the sun and the moon, and he created the stars also. I think it's interesting how the stars are kind of put in as an afterthought. But I think there is a reason for that. And I don't know what it is, so I'm just going to go on. And he makes the Garden of Eden. And the sons of Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel. And that's another very important lesson, because the lesson there is that Cain is evil and Abel is supposedly the good son. But Abel learns a very important lesson, that he says, I am not my brother's keeper. No matter how evil Cain might be, you are your brother's keeper. And that is a lesson that I have learned with bitter tears in just the last couple of years. I can say that my younger brother had a very rough time. My mom passed away in 2018 and left quite a little bit of inheritance, which my younger brother simply stole. And we have no idea where that is. We have no inheritance to collect. And my brother right now is at Bordeaux prison in Montreal. He's going to be serving 28 days. And according to Quebec law, he can serve as much as a year. And he probably will over that time for contempt of court. But we go back. And in the tradition, but the thing is, on that lesson, is that, is he my brother? And the answer is yes, he is my brother. And we're still in touch. We're still brothers. He had an awful lot to say when I lost Wendy about 2 months ago. And he said, but because the Quebec law forbids me from coming to your funeral. And the judges have ordered me to stay in Quebec. And after I was finished talking with him, I looked up and I said, thank God for the judges of Quebec, because I really didn't want him to come. And I'm glad that he didn't. But anyway, we go back to Bereshit. This portion is divided into 7 readings or aliyot. And there is the creation of Adam. And it's a very beautiful painting. The painting was done by Michelangelo and is hanging right now in the Sistine Chapel. It is magnificent. I mean, I don't know how long Michelangelo spent on that, but it is absolutely wonderful. And it shows God touching the finger of Adam on his right hand and creating Adam and Eve. It's just gorgeous. And on day one, God said, "Let there be light." On day two, he created the firmament of the waters that separated the waters from the firmament. On the third day, he created the water, land and sea, caused vegetation to sprout. On the fourth day, God sets lights in the sky. He creates the sun and the stars. And on the fifth day, he had the waters bring the creatures of the sea along with the birds and bless them to be fruitful and multiply. And I believe that is the first of the 613 commandments. Be fruitful and multiply. 4 words. Wendy and I did not have.
Two words in Hebrew. 2 words in Hebrew, but 4 in English.
Yeah.
Right.
What are those 2 words, Rabbi?
Peru or vu.
Peru or vu. That is
Peru
wonderful.
or vu.
And they translate into 4 words in English: be fruitful and multiply. Wendy and I were fruitful, but the way we multiplied was that Wendy took in one of her students. She was a teacher for 26 years. And one of her students was very upset because her mom and stepfather were going to move to Texas and they wanted to take her. Wendy didn't want to leave school. Nanette did not want to leave school. And so Wendy said, "If you want to stay with me, you can do that." And that started a relationship. When I got together with Wendy, we kind of treated Nanette as our daughter. And one day I was at an astronomy conference. We were walking through a meadow. And I said, "Wendy, what do you say about formally adopting Nanette?" And Wendy thought that was a good idea. When we got back home, Wendy called Nanette and said, "You've always been on the outside in your whole life. David and I would like to invite you to come onto the inside. We'd like to adopt you. What do you think?" And Nanette said, "Yeah, I think that's okay." And I was a bit put out because I thought she was being a little flippant about it, but she got off the phone. And about 2 minutes later, her husband, Mark, called. And he said, "Nanette might have been flippant over the phone, but the minute she hung up the phone, she's crying her eyes out." And we adopted, we saw a judge, and we now have, Nanette is our daughter, Mark is our son-in-law, and we have 2 wonderful grandchildren, Summer and Matthew. And going back, in the second reading, God planted a garden in the east of Eden, so that every good and pleasing tree was planted there, including the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And then they have the fall of man, when Eve goes and talks to the serpent. And in those days, the snake was a very intelligent creature and crawled on the trees and really didn't crawl on the ground at all and could talk. And the serpent persuades Eve to eat of the tree of knowledge. And then Adam comes along and says, "What are you doing?" And Eve said, "This apple is very, very good. Here, have some." And Adam says, "Well, we're not really supposed to." He said, "I'll go have some." He said, "Be all right." And Adam eats. And that takes place in the fall of man. And that is in the portion, but it is also the seed of a very important epic that John Milton wrote called Paradise Lost. And it is a very beautiful, one of the most famous poems in all of literature, Paradise Lost. And he talks about that. And God cursed the serpent, and he causes the serpent from now on to crawl across its belly, to eat dirt, and to leave an enmity with the woman and her offspring. And the fourth reading, man had become like God, and but God became concerned that man would also eat from the tree of knowledge. So God banished him from the Garden of Eden to till the soil. And ever since we have had to go through life as fallen creatures. And now we go on to the fifth reading, where Lamech is taking two wives. I guess that was okay in those days. It isn't now. Ada and Zillah, and the ancestor of all those who dwell in tents and amidst herds. And then in the sixth reading, Lamech tells his wife that he had slain, and if Cain was avenged sevenfold, then Lamech would be avenged sevenfold. Adam and Eve had a third son and named him Seth. And in the seventh reading, the Genesis flood narrative, and there's Lamech had a son named Noah. And then in that reading, God decides he feels he made a mistake. He is going to flood the earth. And then there's the chapter with the ark. There is, I'm going to leave out the rabbinic interpretation. There is also, and then we have the Haftorah. And if I could get to it here, the Haftorah is Isaiah 42, talks about God's absolute power. And I'd like to end with the interesting part where after the rain stops and God makes a pact, a covenant with Noah that he will never do it again. And of course, we can say, well, God is perfect. And that reminds me of a personal story. When I was taking Wendy to one of her final treatments, we're traveling on the road, and there's a big 18-wheel truck in front of us. And I put the gear in a fourth gear in order to pass the truck. Wendy says, David, we got loads of time. Take your time. Just follow the truck, which is what I did. And as I did that, my brain envisages a motorcycle between the truck and me. And I'm thinking, there's no motorcycle. There's stuff of these visions. But the motorcycle kept on appearing, wouldn't go away. And finally, I noticed the rider on the motorcycle, and I noticed that was God himself riding the motorcycle. The image finally vanished. We got Wendy's treatment. When we got home, God was sitting on the couch. He looks up at me and he says, how'd I do? And I said, you are God. You can do everything perfectly. And God looks up at me. He said, yes, I am God. I can do everything perfectly except ride a motorcycle. I never knew how to do that. I had to learn how to do that so I could take care of you and Wendy. And I've never forgotten that story. And I wanted to end my little presentation of Bereshit by telling you and sharing that story with you. And now back to you, Rabbi.
Okay, and David, I must add on to the story. If you have the opportunity to visit David's home, David and Wendy's home, there is a freehand drawing in their kitchen that was done by one of the grandsons, right?
Yeah.
Right. Of
It
that
was Summer's
story
fiance.
of the God on the motorcycle in front of David and Wendy's car, and the truck, and it's a beautiful kind of personal story. Thanks, David.
Thank you, and thanks for
You
letting me
stole a
tell
little
it.
bit. You stole a little bit of my thunder and flooding, but that's okay. When we go into the story of Noah, but that's all right. So we're going to do that quickly so we can move on. Um, God sees that there's evil doing in the world. The Hebrew word for the evil at this point is Hamas. It's unrelated to the Arabic word which is actually an acronym for one of the terrorist organizations in the Middle East. Is Hamas, but coincidentally, it means the evil or overriding evil. And God says, "I'm going to destroy all of life on earth, except for Noah and his family, who is deemed to be righteous in his generation, not deemed righteous in all generations, but righteous in his generation. And of course, that's the great debate. Is it easier or harder to be considered righteous when everyone else is so evil? So you balance peer pressure against against the whoever you're being measured against. Anyway, God says build an ark. Contrary to the contemporary culture, Noah doesn't say what's an ark. Noah says, "Okay, yes, sir, I'll do what you tell me to do." Um, and bring a male and female of every species onto the ark so you can sail safely through the waters. 150 days of the flood. The ark settles on Mount Ararat, which the assumption is it's in modern day Iran. Noah sends out a raven, then a dove. The dove returns with an olive branch, so the flood waters are receding, and Noah and his family can finally leave the ark. God promises never again to destroy the world, and sets this rainbow David was talking about as a sign of the promise. There are other stories that meld in there, but human life increases on Earth. Everyone speaks one language, and then they build a city and a tower in Shinar, also known as Babylon or Babel, Bavel, which the Hebrew word means confusion. And the people there saying, "Let's make ourselves powerful. Let's build this tower that reach all the way up to the heavens." God is not happy with the abuse of power that the leaders of Babel are talking about. So he scatters them all over, changes all of their, confuses all of their languages, so they couldn't understand each other. Noah has three sons, Shem, Ham, and Japhet. Shem becomes the Semite people. 9 generations later, we're introduced to Avram, uh, Ham, which the not scholars but the legends would say become the peoples of Eastern Europe and on all the way over into what would be Mongolia, and Yaphet become the peoples that dwell in Africa. We're introduced to Terach, who's the father of Avram, um, and Terach makes the decision to take Avram and Sarai, the wife, and Lot, his grandson, and they go from Ur of the Chaldees. Ur is just the Akkadian word that means city, like if you're a Superman aficionado, like Metropolis, that would be Ur, just the major city of the time and the era. That's of the Chaldees in Iraq, and he heads towards the major city of Haran. Um, just to, there's a lot of legend, there's a lot of midrash of why Avram, why Abram, what was so. I'm sorry, of why Noah. Why was Noah singled out, right, being righteous and wholehearted? Um, uh, the uh, Comparing to Abraham, who Abraham, that when God tells him to be tamim, to be upright, um, uh, and that there was going to be destruction, and an argument that Abraham stands up to God, whereas Noah basically accepts the verdict and says, "Okay, I'm going to save myself and save my own family." Abraham tries to save as many as he can. Um, there's this with the story of Babel. Nechama Leibovich, which Paul and Sherry, when I do this class, I give a lot of some of the insights that I learned from my teacher in Jerusalem, Nechama Leibovich, that
She was a teacher. She was your teacher?
sorry?
She was
What
your
is that?
teacher?
Nechama?
Nahama Leibowitz was your teacher?
Well, everybody in 1970, 71, anyone who was American studying in Jerusalem had to take a class with Nechama Leibovich. So,
Wow, that is, look at you. That is cool.
um, so she talked about uh, the we normally think about the people with the Tower of Babel. We normally think of them in negative terms, but on the other hand, they developed a lot of skills. They were very industrious that we don't necessarily think about that. They developed the technical process of building and fortifying and setting up a city and making up walls and even a lookout tower. There was no real experience before that we know of, but they learned how to do all that. Um, um, but then became we want to make ourselves a name. We want to be all powerful. We want to be well known. Um, and the midrash gives an example of how do we know that they had changed from being very industrious and very strong-willed people into being very selfish. Whatever the midrash talks about. Well, if a worker who was building the tower, if a worker fell and died in the construction, no one even mourned his death. But if one brick fell down, everyone would cry. So that they put more importance to the bricks and mortar than they did to individuals. Um, okay, so let's go on. Lech Lecha is the second portion in in Genesis now, after the third. I'm sorry, after Bereshit and Noah, God says to Abram the familiar words Lech Lecha, go forth. Whether it's go forth, go away, or whether it's go to yourself, go by yourself, however you want to interpret it. Uh, Take Sarai, your wife, take Lot, your brother's son, your nephew, and go towards go towards Canaan. Leave your father's house, leave everything that you've known previously. God says, "I will give this land to you and to your descendants." Um, Avram and Sarai and Lot go on this mission, go on this journey. Again, we're not sure why they were chosen. The Midrash gives lots of different background stories, but we won't go there for at least this year. Um, when they get to Canaan, there's a famine, there's poor crops, there's a food shortage, so they continue and travel down to Egypt. You might remember this is a familiar story that occurs a number of times in the Torah. Abram lies to the Egyptian soldiers and the Pharaoh. He lies to protect himself and Sarai, saying that she's his sister, not his wife. The Pharaoh invites her to come into his palace. As a result of that, God sent plagues on the Egyptians. Here's where we're not really sure if this is all one story or if has been conflated of plagues on the Egyptians along with the Moses story. You'll have to see what biblical criticism says about that. But God sent plagues to punish the Egyptians and warn them not to harm or abuse Sarai. Pharaoh discovers her true identity and says to Avram, why didn't you tell me? And then to appease God, Pharaoh sends them away, and not only sends them back in safety, but gives them gifts. Go lech l'shalom. Abraham, Sarah, and I'm sorry, Avram, it's still Avram, Sarah, and Lot traveled to a place called Bethel. Now, where that name came from, that's obviously anachronistic because, as we're going to discover in portions much closer to this week, the place is not known as Bethel until the time of Jacob. So that's 3 generations later. So why did the narrator call it Bethel at this point? We're not really sure. Abram had become very rich, and very well known. Um, his herdsmen began to quarrel amongst themselves. So Avram divides up the land of the area that he and his tribe and his clan will live, which will be in the area near what's present day Hebron, is due south of Jerusalem and the Judean hills, and then Lot, his nephew, will take some of the herdsmen, some of the sheep, and they will go further south down towards the Dead Sea and establish their base in the city of Stone of Sodom, if you will. Um, there's a story of four kings uh, who uh, who raid or attack Lot's family. They take Lot captive. Abram and his troops come to his rescue, um, and even though they had been arguing about the territory, they established this pattern of how important family is. Again, this is kind of a counterbalance to the Cain and Abel story that David was talking about. That yes, I need to come to the aid of my brother when he's been attacked, when he's been suffering. Yes, I am my brother or my nephew's keeper, whichever you want to say it. It establishes the pattern that's known in Jewish tradition as the mitzvah of pidyon shivuim, of redeeming the captives, rescuing those who have been imprisoned. Um, Sarai is barren, so she gives her handmaiden Hagar to Avram to bear a son. Hagar becomes pregnant and starts to disrespect Sarai. An angel appears and makes her promise, even after Sarai sends Hagar away. But the angel appears and makes a promise to Hagar that she will give birth. The baby's name will be Ishmael. Which is the combination of the words that God will hear, God will listen. And so Ishmael is born when Abram is 86 years old. Soon thereafter, on the eighth day, God tells Avram to circumcise himself and to circumcise Ishmael, and at the same time get the new names. Avram becomes Avraham, great father of great number of people. Sarai goes from being my princess to the princess, and God promises them that Sarah will still bear a son, and rulers of many peoples will issue from her. Um, I'm going to stop there at this point because the next portion that David, are you ready with Vayera, David? You're going to do some of that also?
You can give me a minute to get it ready.
Okay, all right. Because the context of the whole story of what happens in the next portion, which includes the sacrifice of Isaac story, but the context is that um, Sarah had not been able to give birth to a son, that Ishmael was indeed Abraham's firstborn, and that there's tension between the two boys once Isaac is born to Sarah, and again in a familiar story that we'll encounter several times in the Torah is contrary to the typical pattern that the oldest son should be the one who inherits and has the birthright and has the blessing. Sometimes that's not the way the story actually works out. So, okay, David,
Not quite ready yet.
not
So,
quite
so
ready
while
yet.
he gets ready, if I could throw something in, Rabbi.
Please.
So remember I told you when I taught the parent and child second grade with the rabbi together class, I
Yes.
told you what we did for Breshit. So I'm reminded of what we did for the story of Lot and Abraham parting ways and still taking care of each other, although there's tension between them. And,
Yeah.
you know, so what we did was we got 4 decks of cards and we strategically took several cards out of each deck and put them in a different deck. So no deck was complete. And when the kids and the parents came in, and we did our lists, we did whatever, and then we divided them up into 4 teams. So, you know, there might have been, you know, 2 parents and 2 kids or whatever on each team. And we said, we're going to give you each a deck of cards. And do you know how to play solitaire? Yes, we do. Okay, so we want you to play solitaire. And, you know, you're going to see how it goes and do what you need to finish your game. Just whatever you got to do to finish it. And they're going and they're like into it. And they're putting the cards down and they're going, and at some point they all get stuck because they don't have all the cards. And, you know, what we're looking for is them to look up at each other and say, hey, wait, I have two of clubs, you know. And this happened. You know, does anybody need a 2 of clubs? I don't know why I have 2 of them. And the best, and this is just, you know, the idea of cooperation and, you know, you're not in it for yourself necessarily. You need to kind of look at the bigger picture. And the best thing in the world happened. This one kid just said, 8 years old, just said, wait a minute, everybody, stop. We can't finish it unless we help them. We need to help them so that we can finish our game. And it was like the best moment we couldn't have hoped for.
Exactly. It's an early version of the interactive game that we used to do with high school kids called Star Power.
What was that?
Well, it's a rigged system so that some would automatically progress and others would automatically continue to lose points until someone comes forth and says, no, wait a minute, this isn't right. We need to work together so that everyone can succeed and not only some of us at the, you know, at the forfeiture of others. Yeah, same thing.
Yeah,
great.
It was a great class. We had no idea. You know, the first time we did it, we were like, oh boy, do they even know how to play solitaire? How's this going to go? Are they going to get it? And it was just a riot to watch.
Oh, that's
it was
great.
So much fun.
That's great. Okay, good. Thanks. Yeah. David?
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Sherry, for filling in for a few minutes there. Before I begin the era, I wish to make another point about the interaction between faith and science that we did in the discussion of Bereshit. And that goes to Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes is a wonderful, wonderful book, and very often joins faith with geology. In particular, all the rivers run into the sea, yet the sea is never full. Back the waters go into the clouds where they fall again. And I think that really describes the water cycle better than any scientific thing I've ever seen. The era is the 4th weekly Torah portion in the annual cycle of Torah. It constitutes Genesis from chapter 18 to the middle of chapter 22. And the first reading, as Abraham is sitting in the entrance of his tent in the heat of the day, he looked up and saw God. And it kind of reminds me of seeing God on the motorcycle. But he looks up and he sees God in the form of 3 men. He runs, bows to the ground, and welcomes them. Abraham offers to wash their feet and fetch them a morsel of bread, and they assent. And Abraham gets the servant boy to prepare and wait on them under the tree as they eat. In Genesis 18.9, there are dots above the letters, but in the next year, and Sarah would have a son. But of course, Sarah laughs to herself at the prospect of having a child with Abraham so old. God then asks Abraham why Sarah had laughed at bearing a child at her age, noting that nothing is too wondrous for God. In the second reading at the end of Genesis 18, God insists that she had a son. Sarah denies, laughing, and the men set out towards Sodom, and Abram walks toward them to see them off. And God considered whether to confide in Abram that what God was about to do, and Sarah, of course, is denying that she laughed. And I think she's getting the feeling, as Abraham is, that these three men are images of God. In the third reading, as Lot is sitting at the gate of Sodom in the evening, two angels arrive. Lot greets them and bows low to the ground. Lot urged them strongly, so they went to his house, prepared a feast for them, and baked unleavened bread, which they ate. Before they had retired for the night, the men of Sodom gathered around the house and shouting to bring his visitors out so they might be intimate with them. God goes outside the entrance, shutting the door behind him, begging the men of Sodom not to commit a wrong. Lot offers the men his two virgin daughters if they would not do anything to his guests. But they disparage Lot as one who came as an alien and who now sought to rule over them, and they pressed threateningly against him. The visitors stretched their hands and pulled Lot back into the house, and they shut the door, and they struck the people with blindness so that they would be unable to find the door. The visitors directed Lot to bring what family he had out of the city, or they are about to destroy the place. In the fourth reading, Genesis 19, in the fourth meeting, the sun rose, Lot entered Zoar. God rained sulfurous fire from heaven, and he turned Lot into a pillar of salt. And there are some historical ironies here that might have been the eruption of a volcano or simply a very strong tornado or dust devil that came down. Lot is afraid to dwell in Zoar, so he settled in a cave in the hill country with his two daughters. The older daughter told the younger daughter that their father was old, and he proposed that they get Lot drunk and have sex with him so that they might maintain through their father. That night, they make their father drink wine, and the older was being aware. Yeah. And the next day, the older one persuaded the younger one to do the same. The two daughters thus had children by their father. One bore a son named Moab, the father of the Moabites, and the younger bears a son named Ben-Ami, who became the father of the Ammonites. And the closed portion ends here with the end of chapter 19. The reading continues in chapter 21. In the fifth reading, Abraham is now 100 years old when Isaac is born, and Sarah remarks that God had brought her laughter, and everyone would and God would make a nation of Ishmael as well. In the sixth reading, Genesis 21, and in the seventh reading, God tests Abraham. He directs Abraham to take Isaac to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering. And early the next morning, Abraham saddled his donkey, split wood for the burnt offering, and then he and two of his servants and Isaac set out to the place that God had named. On the third day, Abraham saw the place from afar and directed his servants to wait for the donkey, while Isaac and he went up to worship and then returned. Abram took the fire stone and the knife, and he put the wood, and this is rather difficult for me to describe. And Isaac asked Abraham where the burnt offering would be, and Abram replied that God would see to the sheep and the burnt offering. They arrived at the place where God had named, and Abraham built an altar, laid out the wood, and he bound Isaac. And he takes the knife and he is about to slay his son. And then an angel called to Abraham. This is really quite emotional. And he called Abraham, telling him, do not raise your hand against your son. And because now God know that Abraham feared God, and and that he will not allow Abraham to slay his only son, one of his sons. In the Haftorah, from the second 2 Kings, now there's a certain woman in the lives of the sons, and the Parashat tells of God gift of sons to childless women in both the Parashat and the Haftorah. And I think I'm going to leave it there and return it to you, Rabbi. Thank you.
Okay,
This is a
thank
very
you.
difficult.
Obviously, the 22nd chapter of Genesis, the binding of Isaac story is extremely emotional and complicated. There are many ways of interpreting it. Um, Two things that I just would add. Uh, One is that Abraham is so caught up in the moment that the angel has to call to him twice. It's not just that he says, Abraham, stop. It's just Abraham, Abraham. He has to actually really has to call to him twice to make sure that he understands that this is not what God wants. And then, secondly, we kind of say it jokingly, facetiously, but it's true that Isaac never speaks to his father again, understandably, I guess, but Isaac never speaks to him again. Abraham goes back down the mountain and goes back home several days' journey with the servants. We don't really hear from Isaac until the story where he meets Rebecca in the next portion, and the segue seems to be that when again, this is not in the text, it's only in the midrash that kind of fills in the blanks, but then the beginning of the next portion of Chaye Sarah in chapter 23 of Genesis begins with the death of Sarah, not the life of Sarah, but the death of Sarah. And of course the midrash fills it in and says, well, when she saw Abraham coming and the servants coming back without Isaac, she was so distraught that she had a heart attack or whatever, and she died of sadness and shock at that point. Abraham has a different kind of reaction because of he participated in the whole experience. He knows that Isaac is still alive, and secondly, he knows that he still has another son. He still has Ishmael also. And then you get into there's some amazing psychological studies of what it meant to Abraham to know that Sarah had diminished the importance of Ishmael and whatever and all those kinds of things. So again, as I mentioned earlier, there's context to a lot of these stories that we now can impose on our contemporary understanding of the emotions and the psyche of what some of our forefathers and foremothers were going through. Time wise, I'm going to have to just race through a little bit. I need to finish by 3:30. Chaye Sarah, so as we mentioned, Sarah dies at age 127. Um, Abraham negotiates with the local people for a burial place, which he was familiar with the area of Hebron, and that's where he purchases the burial site of the cave of Machpelah. He then sends his servant Eliezer back to Haran, which is where the ancestral home, if you will, for Eliezer to bring a wife for Isaac. Eliezer is disappointed because he was hoping that his own daughter would be Abraham's choice, but that wasn't to be. Abraham wanted Isaac's wife to be from the family, if you will. And there's the story of that Rebecca offers to bring water at the well, not only for Eliezer the servant, but also for Eliezer's camels. And there's negotiation back and forth. And then Rebecca says, yes, she would go back to with Eliezer to meet Isaac. And there's love at first sight when they see each other. And some of the text is even interpreted as that Rebecca fell off the camel when she saw him and fell in love immediately. Um, Isaac takes her into his tent. That was the marriage ceremony in those days, and he is comforted after the death of his mother, of Sarah. But we still are not aware of any conversation between Isaac and Abraham. Rebecca becomes pregnant. We're now in the next portion of Toldot. Rebecca becomes pregnant. There's great pain in her womb. There's two nations. God's angel tells her Esau, who's very hairy, becomes a skilled hunter. Jacob, who's named Jacob, his name means heel because when he comes out, when he's born, he's holding on to Esau's heel. Whether he needs the help, whether he's trying to pull Esau back in so that he can come out first, whichever way you want to understand it. And again, the midrash goes on for page after page after page of stories between the two boys, Esau and Jacob, and they're struggling. What are they struggling about? And whether it's in the womb or whether they're as toddlers, whether it's youngsters, we know that eventually Esau sells Jacob the birthright. What use is this birthright to me when I'm famished, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. A similar story to Abraham that Isaac, who actually in his lifetime never left the borders of the promised land, never left Canaan, but he visits the king of the Philistines. And he tells them, maybe he'd heard the story of Abraham and Sarah, but he tells the king of Philistines that Rebecca is his sister, not his wife. But this king understands, and he offers Isaac and Rebecca a certain amount of protection, so that Isaac becomes very, very successful as a landowner. But then there's a question of does he become too rich and too powerful in the eyes of the local king, similar to the story of the Egyptians and the Pharaoh. There again, we're not sure how many of these stories have all been conflated back and forth with different characters, but the stories become very similar. So the king sends him away, and they meet in Beersheba and agree for a peace treaty, which is why it's called Beersheba, because that's the well of swearing an oath and an oath of agreement for their peace treaty. Then there's the story that Jacob and Rebekah conspire to steal the blessing that Isaac would be given to the firstborn, and Rebekah dresses Jacob up in furry cloth, and prepares Isaac's favorite meal so that he can go in there, and Isaac blesses Jacob rather than Esau, to Esau's total dismay. And then she suggests that strongly she suggests that Jacob should leave and go back to her father and brother's home, and hopefully Esau will get over his anger, and whatever, but he'll be safe. We get into last week's Torah portion of Jacob fleeing from Esau, and that's where he puts a stone under his head and dreams of the ladder the ladder reaches up to heaven. Um, uh, Sherry wanted to know, David, if you have any insights into the astronomical visions of a ladder going up to heaven. So I don't know about in other literature, but let me go on for a couple of minutes, and then if you have something that you can comment. So and there are angels going up and coming back down on the ladder. Jacob wakes up and says, if this is the house of God, then I ask God to protect me, and I will give a tithe, 10% of everything that I know. Um, uh, Jacob goes on and meets with Laban on behalf of Rebecca's family, works for 7 years because he's fallen in love with Rachel, but Laban substitutes Leah, the older sister. Uh, Jacob then has to work for 7 more years to get Rachel as well. Leah does bear sons to Jacob. Rachel is barren initially, so in the same pattern that Sarah had given Hagar to Abraham, uh, Rachel gives her handmaiden Bilhah to Jacob. Bilhah conceives and has sons, and so to match it up, Leah gives her handmaiden Zilpah to Jacob, and they have more sons. On and off and on and off. There's a breakdown of trust between Jacob and Laban. Rachel finally gives birth to a son. That's Joseph, who's the favorite. He's the mama's boy. Um, uh, and they start to divide up and gather all the people and possessions, and Jacob is going to take the whole clan back to Canaan. There's a strange story of Rachel stealing one of her brother's idols. Not really sure what that is about. Why she did that. Again, the Midrash comes forward with lots of possibilities, but the text doesn't really say. Um, there are accusations between Jacob and Laban, but eventually there's a peace treaty, and they set up a monument or a pillar of stones, and they promise not to cross into each other's territories back and forth. We finally get to this week's portion where Jacob sends messengers ahead to anticipate the meeting up, the confrontation with Esau. He finds out that Esau is coming to meet him with 400 soldiers. So Jacob divides his clan up into two camps, that if one of them becomes attacked, the other one might be able to escape or survive. And in the night before the ultimate confrontation, Jacob wrestles with an angel. Again, the Midrash tries to fill in a lot of it. Is he wrestling with himself, with his own conscience, of the kind of person that he's been before, deceitful, and how's he going to actually seek forgiveness from Esau? Is he wrestling? Is he fighting with an advanced team or an advanced scout or warrior that Esau has sent ahead to check out Jacob's ability to fight, whatever it really is. But ultimately, when they meet up, they do reconcile. Hugs, kisses. Who is this? Oh, this is my wife. This is my family, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They agree where they're going to live, and again that they will live peacefully, recognizing each other's territory. Jacob settles near that area that was called Bethel in Shechem, present-day Nablus, north of Jerusalem. Uh, Dinah, who is the one girl out of all of Jacob's children, at least the one that we have a name for, is raped by some of the locals in Shechem, and two of her brothers come and exert vengeance upon all the residents of Shechem. Rachel does give birth to one more son, that's Benjamin, but she dies in childbirth, and she's buried they're in a particular grave that people visit even to this very day. Some Beth Shalom Temple Center people visited that place 2 weeks ago, near in a grave monument near Bethlehem. Isaac grows old and dies at age 120, and then Jacob and Esau reunite to bury him back in the sacred family plot, the cave of Machpelah. So again, I'm going to have to be time conscious. I can't go into some of the Nechama commentary about that portion. David, do you have anything to add about the dream of a ladder going up to heaven?
Yes, I do, very briefly. And that is that I take that very personally, Jacob's ladder, when I go out to observe the night sky, especially these unhappy days. It is like being offered a tranquilizer that is this large without any side effects at all. It brings me peace, it brings me joy. And I do want to add one more thing as I'm looking at Amy. We're studying the Torah in my home, my observatory here, at Amy's home, and with Paul and Sherry, they are symbolizing the state of Arizona and the study of Torah in the state of Arizona, which is, as they're driving through right now, which is so beautiful and meaningful to me. And that's what I
We are
want.
wandering, we are Bamidbar. We are wandering through the desert.
Right.
Wandering Jews.
Well, okay, and so we can play with the Hebrew
With
because
food, with food.
not only is it Bamidbar, but if you change the vowels around, it becomes Bamidaber, which means
Right.
that you're
To speak.
traveling along with all of the words that are spoken and
Yeah.
all of the insights and the discussion that we shared. Having said that, I'm going to have to run. Wish everyone health, happiness. Some of you know that we're going to be traveling for a couple of weeks. So if you're celebrating Hanukkah, have a good, happy holiday. If you're celebrating Christmas, have a good, merry, healthy Christmas celebration. And for all, a good and healthy and peaceful new year. And we'll see you in January.